Hello, this is Sneaky Turtle with my first KSP video. On the top, we're going to put a probe core, and this is going to be a Delta 4 heavy time-lapse build. If you don't know how to copy things on PC, you just Alt left click and then you can copy it, and then you can just use the offset tool and move fuel inside of this, and that way you fuel inside of that inside of the structural tube, and then you just use a decoupler. The single skiff engine, and then a decoupler on the bottom. Just do the 25 decoupler. And then the classic orange Delta 4 heavy tanks. And then just copy them with Alt left click. You want to make sure these structural tubes are full of fuel, because if they're not full of fuel, then you won't make it to orbit. And if you're wanting it to make the Delta 4 to like Mars or something, you want to put a rover on Mars with the Delta 4, then that's definitely what you want to do. So just put it down there and offset it inside with the offset tool. I'm not exactly sure what the controls are for copying on. And then this is where you can use the copy tool to just kind of copy the entire booster and then move it over. definitely do the fairing as big as you want. And this might not be the most accurate fairing. Just trying to get it as close as possible. Whatever you want in the fairing. Just for this demonstration, I'm just going to put a small probe in the fairing. And yeah, that's it. Just a tiny one with a little reaction wheel. I'll use this one. If you can even attach things to it. And then I'll just use some batteries on the side. It is power for its flight. And I'll put some solar panels on the side as well. That way it has basically infinite power. I'll also put a small antenna on it. That way it has communication with Kerbin. That's the entire flight. Okay. And then we just name it Delta 4. We're good to go. Now I'll show a small launch demonstration of this. But make sure you strut everything. If you don't strut anything, the whole thing will just fall apart. So make sure everything's strutted. And then auto strut is really useful. You just go into settings and then advanced tweakables, and you can activate auto strut. And what that does is it basically just struts the entire rocket from the inside, and that really helps keep things stable. Yeah, I think auto strut's like the best. But make sure you don't rigid attach fairings, because there's rigid attaching too. If you rigid attach a fairing, it breaks. I'll also use some Separatron motors to separate these. That way they fly away nice and efficiently from the rocket. And then make sure your staging is correct, and you are set to fly. And I just had I don't know why I put it a coupler there. Make sure you don't make that mistake. I don't know why I put it a coupler there. I'm just gonna offset these a little bit so they look a little nicer. I have that on the bottom. Separatron motors go when it decouples. These stages can be, this will be first. That engine will ignite. And then that will separate. And that will separate at the same time. Okay. Perfect. And then what I like to do is I really like these structural pillars. They kind of hold the rocket in place. And they look pretty cool too. So that looks pretty good. I'll actually lower it into the ground just a little more. And then make sure the engines are before these. That way you can throttle up the engines to full power. I'm going to be launching from the desert launch site just because I think it looks a little cooler. Then I throttle up the engines to full power, separate those motors, and lift off. It's pretty slow takeoff. I do like the vectors though because they have a lot of gimbal and they have a nice cool looking thrust. I also have the Real Plume mod installed, so that makes them look a little nicer. But that is the only mod I have installed. My ascent profile will just be going up for a little ways, and then I'll be pitching over to 90 degrees by the time we hit 10 kilometers. A pretty average gravity turn. Nothing too special. And then I'm going to throttle down the main core. And that way it loses fuel not as quickly as the others so that I can stage away the others first. I mean, you can use fuel lines if you want to. I didn't use fuel lines for this one. So, yeah, I'll just throttle down the main engine. But we'll just climb up out of the atmosphere, and yeah, should be a pretty good ascent. Nothing should be wrong. Nope. And we'll just deliver a small satellite into orbit. Obviously, the Delta IV Heavy today, I believe, is the only super heavy lift vehicle, so it can carry a lot more than this. Not exactly sure what the classification for a super heavy lift vehicle is. If anyone actually watches the video, then you can correct me. And we'll just be pitching over to 90 degrees now, because we've hit 10 kilometers. I should have pitched over a little more. Oh, losing a little weight, shoulder off, yeah. There we go. Yeah, just pretty standard ascent profile. Nothing too special. I'm going to throttle down this engine just a little more. And once those two side tanks are jettisoned, we'll throttle the main engine back to full power. For some reason the rocket's pitching up, I don't know why. Check my apogee. 30,000. So yeah, just continuing an ascent into orbit. gonna go for an apogee of 100 to 200 kilometers, because 70 kilometers in KSP is space, but the Kármán line is 100 kilometers, so I might just do 100 or 200. Seems like a pretty good orbit. Actually, we might just use the rest of the fuel out of this stage. Well, I'll just jettison these 2 side tanks. They're now jettisoned and in space, so we can continue our ascent. That's a pretty crooked orbit. Let's fix that. Yeah, you can just use the normal and anti-normal to fix your orbit if you ever mess it up. And then the prograde marker to get into orbit. And then a nice circular orbit. Looks like we have so much fuel we could go to like Duna or something, because we have 2,000, almost 3,000 meters a second of fuel left in just this stage. So that's lots of fuel. And then the other one we have more than 2,000 meters a second, so we could probably get to Duna and maybe back. But this will just be a short tutorial, so I'll just do orbit. To showcase the second stage, I will jettison this stage now. And I do not need the fairing anymore, so I'm going to jettison the fairing. Because once you pass 70 kilometers, you really don't need the fairing, it's just extra weight. And I'll continue on my way to orbit. And if you don't know, when you're doing maneuvers, you just cut the time of the burn in half, and that's when you start your burn. That might not make very much sense. I didn't say that very well, but now we are in orbit, and the payload can be expended. So I'll just fire it off. Into space it goes. Extend both of its solar panels. Extend its communication satellites. Or antennas. And a small probe delivered to orbit. Thank you for watching the video, if you're still here. I'll see you next time.